This is the first video in a series of videos I'm doing for bass to develop walking bass lines. So what I'm going to do in this series of videos, and there's going to be 4 of them, is I'm going to start at the very beginning for people who are just starting to learn about walking bass lines and want to implement them in their playing. I'm going to start with level 1, which is the easiest possible scenario that you can have. And then I'm going to give you 9 or 10 more sophisticated and intricate routines that you can use to build spontaneous walking bass lines by ear. So here's a quick demo of me playing walking bass lines where I'm using some of these routines that I'm about to show you. And if you're interested in learning how to do this, stick around. So what I was doing there was just one chorus of Autumn Leaves, where I was using a bunch of these routines that I'm about to show you and mixing them up and putting them into action by ear, so that I was essentially improvising my way through the changes, doing walking bass lines through that tune. And I'm going to start you at the very beginning of how to do that and start putting together these routines so that when they're grouped together, you have an entire language to work with that allows you to play through changes. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to give you a short 4-note routine, and I'm just going to be running it through a 2-5-1 in C major. So D minor 7, G7, C. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the first routine. And all of these routines that I'm going to do with all of these videos are just going to be 4 notes. And what you're going to do is you're going to take 4 notes and you're going to link it to the next 4 notes, and you're going to link that to the next 4 notes, and so on and so on. So what's going to start as just 4 notes on one chord is going to end up being, a 10-minute tune by the time you get done, by the time you get all this put together and you're doing it by ear. So let's do the first one. The first routine is going to be called root, 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 root. That's it. 4 quarter notes where I'm just playing the root of the chord. So on D minor 7, that's it. That's the routine. Now I'm going to connect it to G7. Now to C. Okay, that's as basic as it gets. Now, even though that kind of sounds boring and it's just root, 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 imagine all the rock records you've heard. Imagine all the pop records you've heard. If you listen to it and you pay attention, the vast majority of the time what the bass player is doing is just playing the roots of the chords. So even though that's super simple and it sounds pretty boring, rhythm is the key to make it a lot more interesting, and so is the context of the music that you're playing. But if you go back and listen to pop records, funk records, soul records, rock records, every single punk rock record that was ever made, the bass player is always playing the root. And it might not be quarter note pulses, it's going to be the rhythm that makes it interesting. But just because you're landing on the roots, that's the point of the bass player, which is to define what chord all the other instruments are playing on top of in the first place. So don't underestimate the importance of the root. Don't underestimate how much rhythm can make just playing the roots a lot more hip. And also the fact that that's what most styles of music do almost all the time exclusively. So this is as simple as it gets, but it's also extremely effective. So don't underestimate that. Now we're going to get into where we start adding a little bit of color and a little bit of movement. So this routine is going to be root, root, root approach. And this is where it gets interesting. The approach note can be one of 4 combinations. So if I'm going from D minor 7 to G7, here I put in an approach note, and my next target note is G. So it's root, 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 blank, root of the G7. In that blank, you can put 4 approach notes, like I said. You can put diatonic approach notes and chromatic approach notes. And those break down like this. You can put it in a diatonic scale tone from above the root that you're going to. So in this case, it'd be A, going down to G. So that would sound like this. You can put in a diatonic scale tone from below the target tone, which would be F. You can put in a chromatic or half-step approach tone from above, which would be A flat. You can put in a chromatic half-step approach note into the next chord from below, which would be F sharp. So you can do all 4 of those combinations, and you can mix them up at will. So let's just do 2-5-1. Now I'm approaching C. So I'm going to do all from diatonic above, then diatonic below, then chromatic above, then chromatic below, and then I'm going to mix them up. So that's a bunch of different combinations right there. Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's from diatonic above. Now I'm going to do diatonic below. Now I'm going to do chromatic above. Now I'm going to do chromatic below. Now on this one, you'll notice that the chromatic below, when I'm approaching C, is actually the note B. And in this key, and in this tonality, that B is actually diatonic. Don't get hung up on whether or not that's diatonic or chromatic so much. What you really want to focus on is that it's an approach note approaching the target tone C, and it's approaching it by half step. So what you want to focus on is the sound of a half step approach from above or below. And sometimes those approach notes will be diatonic, and sometimes they'll be chromatic. But you don't want to necessarily get super hung up on the labeling so much as what it sounds like. So here's an example where I'm mixing stuff up, because you can mix these combinations. That was diatonic and chromatic. One more. One more. So you can get a lot of play out of these. So far what I've shown you is combinations that you can use over D minor 7, G7, C. So if you're doing root, root, root approach, that's great. And that's a nice beginning way to approach this. That's not the end of it though. What you want to end up doing is playing this over complicated tunes at fast tempos, or even ballads or whatever. But what I would suggest to develop that, and to make sure that you have you want to make sure you have these routines down solid. You don't want to underestimate how powerful they can be and how much usage you can get out of them. So 2-5-1 is great just to get the 4-note routine down and see how it works on one chord. Once you have that and you've got 2-5-1 patterns down pretty well, then I would suggest doing it over cycles. So 1-6-2-5, 2-5-1-6, 2-5-1-5, 3-6-2-5, 1-4-3-6, any kind of cycle pattern or a turnaround pattern. Start working them over, larger chunks of chord progressions. Once you get good at that, and you can do the routines, as many routines as you can think of by ear, kind of spontaneously. You want to get really comfortable with them. Then move on to a 12-bar blues. Then play it through 12-bar blues and get it all over the neck, get it everywhere, and do it in that 12-bar blues, and then do that in every key. Once you get that down, then you want to move on to a standard or some kind of jazz tune that's fairly easy, like Autumn Leaves. You don't want to do Donna Lee or something at 300 beats a minute. That's going to be a mess. Take Autumn Leaves, take something like that. Do the same thing. Do it in every key. Do it in all the positions, not just one position on the neck, and really get that routine down all over the place. And then bring it and then start on a new routine. So even though right now this sounds easy, once you start applying it to all those variations of chord changes that I just mentioned, that's when you know whether or not you've got it down. And I wouldn't move on to another routine until you've got the previous one down, because then eventually you're going to want to start connecting them. You're going to want to connect them freely, and you don't want to get hung up because you didn't learn one well enough. So that's root approach. In this lesson, I'm going to give you one more routine that breaks things up even more and adds in more chromaticism. So it's going to be root, approach, root, approach. So that's going to be the root of the D minor chord, followed by an approach note back to the root of the D minor chord. So as I mentioned, you can do approach notes from a whole step above, from a half step above, from a whole step below, or from a half step below. So if I'm doing root, approach, D, approach, back to D, approach to G. So I did D, half step below, to approach D, to half step above G, down to G. Now if I'm going to do the whole 2-5-1 sequence, it'll be or maybe those were diatonic approaches from above. Or maybe I'll do so I did D, C, diatonic from below, D, F, diatonic from below, to F sharp, to G, to B, to C. So as you can see, just root, approach. There's a lot of combinations that you can come up with, and it really starts to create harmonic movement. So get really good at that over 2-5-1 in major, then 2-5-1 in minor, then some kind of turnaround, then 12-bar blues, then some kind of tune, and get it all over the neck. Get that thing all over the place, and then mix it up with root, and then root approach. Just work with those three for a week or two, and that's going to really take you from the very beginning up into stuff that starts sounding like walking bass lines. In the next video, I'm going to show you a couple more routines, and this thing is going to start to develop and grow arms and legs really quick, so stay tuned for that.